Perhaps you know that the troy ounce of about 31 grams differs from the standard imperial ounce of about 28 grams, and also that, by long tradition, the troy standard was specifically associated with the weighing of gold, silver and bread. Those things are true. Perhaps you also believe troy weight was created at the medieval market of Troyes in France, or alternatively was brought to England from ancient Troy by King Brut. Both of those things are almost certainly false. In reality, the roots of the Troy system of weight is probably far older than ancient Troy. That is my belief, and it was also the position of the official Skinner account of the history of troy weight published by the London Science Museum in 1967. This is me waving my copy of the Skinner book. 60 years on, we can improve on his account, but in reality, professional academia has spent the last 60 years, for the most part, going backwards, destroying any understanding of the history of weight. Here I plan to start to try remedy that. This video is just a taster, a test to see if anyone is interested in understanding two linked matters. Firstly, what is the best historical explanation of the origins and development of troy weight? Secondly, why are most of the things we hear today wrong, whether we get them from Wikipedia, from YouTube, or from university or museum professionals? Often they tell us nonsense. Ultimately, I want to argue that the history of troy weight is part and parcel of the history of money, that the forces which suppress its correct history are at the same time giving a false account of the nature of money itself. That argument is still way down the line. I will persevere and reach it if enough people watch, recommend and subscribe here. Please do. These videos will not be monetized. Now to some basic outlines. The troy weight system is primarily explained as being a 12-ounce pound, each ounce being 20 troy pennies, each penny being 24 troy barley grains. See the table for the gram equivalents. The use of these troy barley grains seems to begin around 1351. Before that, the weight of the troy penny was just the same, but it was figured instead as 32 lighter troy wheat grains. Despite what we are told, these grains are not natural grains. They just name mathematical fractions. The Babylonians, the Romans, the French and many others all had different grains. All were roughly 0.05 grams, but historically only the Babylonian might seem to be a natural grain. If we turn now to the coins of the 16th century, we discover that they were struck to troy standard. A crown of Edward VI weighed a troy ounce. Notice, however, a crown was figured as 60 pence in money, while being just 20 pence in weight. That change is easy to explain. Repeated episodes of inflation during prior centuries had stripped away 2/3 of the value of a penny by weight. No big deal, actually. The first pint of beer I bought cost about 2 shillings, that is to say, 10 pence. Often enough I pay 50 times that today. Inflation back in the 16th century was rather sluggish by our standards. A second matter is less easy to explain. By weight, a troy pound was 12 ounces, each of 20 pennies. However, a money pound reversed the factorisation. A money pound was 20 shillings, each of 12 pennies. Either way, we get 240 pennies in the pound, of course. Whether or not this was a deliberate attempt to befuddle the man in the street, it surely would have. Despite the use of the troy ounce to fix coinage, at the mint after 1351 and legally in 1527, wrangling about its very exact standard continued down to the 1580s, when a committee commissioned by Elizabeth I fixed it and distributed copies of the standard to most cities. Here is a picture of the set at Lancaster. Notice someone has pinched about half of them since the 1580s. This third structure is completely different to the previous two. The set starts at 256 ounces and goes down in halves. It is pure binary. Thus it includes a 16-ounce pound and runs down to a dram, which is an eighth of an ounce, about 3.9 grams. So there is no 12-ounce pound in the set, nor any pennyweight either. To sum up, that makes three different mathematical structures associated with troy weight. The binary structure, pointing to a 16-ounce pound, is today called an apothecary's pound rather than a troy pound, but to do that suggests those constructing the primary standard itself did not know what they were doing. Most likely, medieval moneymen were just way more proficient with their times tables than almost anyone today. To such a mind, what we would view as three different systems perhaps just looked like one system viewed from three different standpoints. Meanwhile, the ordinary medieval man in the street would find this befuddling. The same is even more true for most decimal accustomed and calculator using modern people. That will do for now on the forms of the troy weight system. Let us turn to the separate matter, that is, the mangling of the history of troy weight at the hands of professional academics over the last 60 years or so. We will track this through the three official texts of 1967, 1987 and 2004. As said at the start, if you want to read just one official textbook, the slender 1967 volume by Skinner is the one to pick. F.G. Skinner studied historical weights at the London Science Museum for 30 years. His work had deep roots in the best independent amateur scholarship of the Victorian period and earlier. In brief, Skinner traced the roots of troy weight back more than 4,000 years. He held it was adopted and structurally revised by an Arab caliph in Damascus around 698, and in that form was adopted by Offa in England in 793 AD, with only minor changes. All that seems correct. Skinner died in 1966. His book was published posthumously. Just 20 years later, a different curator at the Science Museum, Dennis Vaughan, suppressed even the existence of the Skinner text, introducing an alternative account by Robin Connor. Skinner had worked for decades at the heart of a hub of traditional scholarship in London. Connor was a Canadian physicist, an excellent scholar, but working in isolation. He apparently became prey to personal preconceptions. Skinner was not mentioned in his text. Any role for Arab scholarship was rejected in half a sentence. Connor wanted and gave a Roman source for the troy system without noticing that his explanation used a seriously incorrect standard for the weight of the imperial Roman denarius. I highly recommend Connor's account for the last 1,000 years or so. Before that, it should be ignored. In 2004, the National Museum of Scotland published a book by Connor and Simpson in which Connor rejected his own 1987 account. Now it was argued that, since the name word troy for weight was first recorded in use only in 1376, the system itself could not much predate that. Instead, we are told that the troy system only arrived in England in the 14th century and came from Belgium. Think about that argument. The name word dinosaur was first used in 1841. Can we thus conclude dinosaurs did not much predate 1841? This 2004 argument is rubbish. If we reject the given reason for this change in direction, we must hunt around for another one. Notice that around that time, political forces in London and Edinburgh were pushing for the adoption of the euro by the UK as a whole. And this is not the only example of the tampering with history apparently associated with that campaign. Remarkably, it appears Offa adopted troy weight as part of an early medieval Brexit event, a refusal to align British coin with the continental currency of Charlemagne. Thus matters seem to come full circle when the history of that event is itself suppressed in association with a new attempt to align British and continental currencies. That is it for today. Just to gallop through what we mean by troy weight, some hints about its true history, and some revelations about the false histories which now abound, even in elite academic scholarship. There is much more to say about the history of these matters, to be said better backed up by the evidence. There is much more to say about the suppression of that history of understanding, which seems to go hand in hand with the push towards modern fiat currency by Maynard Keynes. Thanks for watching. I will be taking notice of criticisms posted below. If you want to hear more on these matters, please do subscribe and recommend.